The audience went wild, and all the students began cheering for their favorite teams. Once a team entered the arena, a blue barrier appeared around the ring to prevent monsters from escaping and attacking the spectators. Vikir, who was waiting for his turn with a lost gaze, started looking at the ground since he didn't remember seeing the academy exam in his previous life. He only knew one needed to fight but didn't expect to do so against monsters. Hybro, who was standing next to him, noticed this, and the three brothers were somewhat surprised, not knowing why Vikir was so deep in thought. With a kind smile, Hybro extended his hand toward our boy and, seeing that he had no information about the exam, explained that upon entering the stadium, the virtual reality magic circle was activated, and the surroundings turned into something like a dungeon. When monsters swarmed in masses, the exam began. Inside the stadium, a horde of mud ants emerged, releasing a curtain of poisonous gas. The students who were fighting covered their noses to avoid inhaling the smoke and dying. The rules were simple. One only had to endure as long as possible until their HP dropped to 0. The poison released by the monsters was diluted real poison, so even if one didn't receive a physical attack, they had to be careful with the poison since it could continue consuming their HP points. Upon hearing this, Vikir came out of his trance, turned around, and with a serene expression asked if they were really using poison. Hybro mentioned that he had heard that when an accident occurred, the academy instructors deactivated magic and then intervened. Vikir realized that they knew a lot, so he asked if they had ever practiced before. With a smile, Middleborough admitted that when Vikir was away from the family home, they had practiced several times at the family training center. Vikir's eyes widened with excitement, and with a kind smile, he decided to leave this in the hands of the triplets. They should run as wildly as they wanted so that Vikir wouldn't have to move. Upon hearing this order, the triplets couldn't help but clench their fists and feel admiration for our boy. With an excited smile, they swore to protect him firmly. This was the first mission given by the master, so they had to do it well. While they were talking, Tudor and the others arrived at the area. He began waving his hand and caught Vikir's attention. Our boy snapped out of his trance and turned toward them. With a kind smile, Piggy started greeting our boy, while on the other side, Sancho, who had his arms crossed, began showing a cheerful smile. Tudor began to touch his head with his hand and, with a nervous expression, realized that Vikir had prepared well for the exam. He approached our boy, put his hand near his mouth, and with a calm gaze explained that he would never have thought that Vikir would associate himself with the Baskerville triplets, questioning if he was really okay. Upon hearing this, the triplets couldn't help but feel furious, creating tension in the atmosphere. Vikir did not lose composure and responded that he had formed a group together not because they had forced him to do so, but because it had truly been a prior agreement. Tudor's eyes filled with confusion and concern, asking if this was true. Vikir didn't even look him in the eyes, and replied that a few weeks ago they had asked him for help to learn more about the monsters. Tudor thought they were intimidating Vikir, but he refuted this idea, explaining that he was fine. Piggy's attention was fixed on the sky as the virtual magic barrier had disappeared, leaving him somewhat surprised. In the stadium were the corpses of mud ants, and in the middle were 3 students who were somewhat injured and exhausted. They were Team 68 of first year. It was the turn of Team 69 from the first year to come to the stadium. A confident smile spread across Granville's face as it was his team's turn. With a confident expression, he began walking toward the stadium and decided to show what they were capable of. The 2 men couldn't help but smile, while on the other side Sinclair started following them. She was excited. Once they entered the stadium, fierce mud ants appeared and began roaring. The virtual magic barrier was activated, causing the ants to charge against Granville's team. He activated his power, making a magic circle appear which began to release poisonous gas. Seeing that the ants were ready to attack, he couldn't help but go on alert. He turned around and asked Sinclair if she was ready. She extended her hands, closed her eyes and concentrated, making a magic circle appear behind her. Sinclair opened her eyes and with a serious expression began to use her power. The magic circle began to release energy which started to concentrate in front of her. The glow became intense and her gaze fixed on it. Her eyes were full of determination. She wanted to show the world what she was capable of. Several ants charged at her, but just then she stomped hard on the ground and counter-attacked, causing the bodies of the ants to be flung backward. Upon seeing this, the audience couldn't help but go wild, and everyone started cheering for her. Her power even caught Vikar's attention. He raised his head and his gaze fixed on her. The combat was fierce, so she began to invoke another spell and prepared to attack again. There was a reason why she was in the first place. With that level of skill, she would have become a famous mage in the future. However, there were no records of her in the era of destruction. A while later, the exam for Team 69 of the first year ended, and the virtual magic barrier was Granuel, who had his hands on his hips and whose men were exhausted. Sinclair was lying on the ground with her clothes full of scratches. She began to wipe the sweat from her forehead with her hand and sighed, as the exam had been difficult. According to the results, they had set a new record with 19 minutes and 55 seconds, being the highest time among first-year students. Seeing this, Tutor couldn't help but clench his fists and feel frustrated, his eyes filled with rage. He was furious to see that the bastard Granuel had achieved a new first-year record. Despite being somewhat surprised, Sancho and Piggy remained silently watching without saying anything. At that moment, Tutor's eyes widened in surprise as something caught his attention. It was Granuel, while he had one hand resting on his waist. He began to point at Tutor with the finger of the other and with an evil smile said that he couldn't wait to see him run naked. Seeing his expression, Tutor, Sancho, and Piggy couldn't help but get angry and clench their teeth tightly. Their eyes were full of rage and they swore not to lose against him. At the same time, someone wearing white boots descended into the stadium. It was Team 108, Vikar's team. While our boy was walking calmly, the triplets moved ahead, started observing their surroundings and couldn't help but smile. The three were excited since their master had entrusted them with a mission. Once Vikar entered the stadium, Tutor, who was among the crowd, placed his hands near his mouth and began cheering him on with a smile. Meanwhile, on the other side, Piggy started waving his hand, saying that they trusted him. Our boy simply kept walking without paying attention. He was more focused on what was about to happen next. The triplets became serious and filled with determination since they wanted to take the first place for Vikar. The mud ants emerged from the cave, their piercing gazes fixed on Vikar and the others. Bianca, who had her arms crossed, was somewhat confused. She began observing Vikar and asked what was happening to him. Piggy's attention focused on her, his eyes filled with surprise and confusion as he did not know what she was referring to. A shield appeared around Vikar's body. With a calm attitude, he drew the bow and grabbed an arrow. Bianca couldn't believe that he was going to use a bow. Piggy explained that Vikar had registered the bow as his main weapon in the Ice Corps. The ants prepared to attack, and upon seeing this, Vikar also prepared to shoot the bow. Bianca and the others wanted to see how well he handled the bow. In the blink of an eye, our boy shot a barrage of arrows at the monsters. Bianca was speechless. Piggy was open-mouthed and surprised at how fast he was. Bianca's eyes filled with fear, and her attention fixed on Vikar. She didn't know what that rapid fire was. Highborough, Middleborough, and Lowborough drew their swords and began to fight against the ants. Vikar was behind them, shooting arrows. Even though he was fast, his power was weak, and he also lacked precision since once the arrows reached the ants, they lost a lot of speed. Vikar prepared to attack again. But at that moment he began to feel a sense of unease. He froze for several seconds, and his eyes started to shine with seriousness as he began thinking silently. The tip of the arrow began to shine, and not long after, Vikar released his powerful mana and enveloped the tip with it. He knew he was giving a bad impression, so he attacked again and the mana arrow struck an ant, destroying its body into pieces. Highborough stood in front of Vikar, and with a serious expression prepared to defend him from the ants' attacks. Vikar began to gaze at the ground. If he didn't hide his abilities, it was going to be a nuisance, but it was uncomfortable for him not being able to show his abilities. He began to remember what his friend from the tribe had told him. She clenched her fist and with a furious gaze promised not to let Vikar go if he went somewhere and didn't give everything he had. His eyes filled with joy, bringing a smile to his face. He apologized for not being able to keep his promise. The little spider emerged from his clothes and began to show a tender expression. Vikar's attention fixed on her. With a determined smile, he decided it was time to let her act. The corpse of the mud ants began to release poisonous gas. The small spider descended from Vikar's shoulder and started bouncing on the ground. Her eyes filled with happiness, she couldn't help but feel joyful at seeing food. Without wasting a second, she began to absorb the poison. Vikar turned his back to her and started observing in silence. He had heard that the poison came from the ants. He assumed this place was no different from a buffet for the baby spider, so he decided to let her have fun until the exam was over. Several minutes passed and the virtual magic barrier did not disappear, and Vikar and the others continued fighting. Some time later, the exam of Team 108 came to an end. Highborough, Middleborough, and Lowborough fell to their knees on the ground due to exhaustion, while on the other side, Vikar was standing and not at all tired. They had managed to endure 19 minutes and 50 seconds, obtaining second place among the first-year students. A smug smile appeared on Granwell's face and his eyes began to shine with confidence. He started laughing like a madman since no one could beat his team's record. He and his friends started laughing, pointing at Vikar with his finger. He said there was no way a commoner could defeat him, revealing that this was the difference in rank between them. Sinclair, who had her arms behind her back, began to show a forced smile, thinking that phrase sounded like something from a third-rate villain. Consumed by humiliation, Highborough, Middleborough, and Lowborough stood up and placed their swords on their necks. They were sad and thought that the crime of not giving first place to Vikar was decapitation. However, Vikar, who was somewhat confused, turned around and gave them the order to stop since the second place was also too high. It was team number 109's turn to enter the stadium. The doors opened. Sancho, who carried an axe on his back, mentioned that Vikar had obtained second place. Tigi, who was next to him, thought it was an achievement worth celebrating. Tudor prepared to enter the stadium. The team entered the stadium. Bianca closed her eyes and with a smile began waving her hand. Tigi couldn't help but feel nervous seeing so many people, while on the other side Sancho started showing a calm smile. Tudor's eyes filled with emotion, bringing a smile to his face, to defeat Granol, who held the record of 19 minutes and 55 seconds. They had to achieve a better time. A mud ant opened its mouth and lunged at them, but Tudor drew the spear and attacked the monster's head, shattering it into pieces without much effort. Bianca drew her bow and began attacking from a distance. Tigi was the captain and was giving orders. Tudor, who wielded a spear, was on defense, and Sancho, who was the tank, stood in front massacring the monsters with his axe. Vikar began to observe and his eyes filled with surprise. Tudor and Sancho were fighting against the monsters at the vanguard. Bianca was attacking from behind with the bow, and Tigi was pointing at the monsters with his finger. He was a lieutenant who observed all the situations and gave instructions. Our boy crossed his arms and realized that judging by their good teamwork, they had prepared a lot, and he believed they could obtain first place. Vikar began to touch his neck with his hand as he felt a sense of emptiness. He placed his hand over the collar and couldn't help but go on alert, his eyes filled with fear upon realizing what was happening. His eyes widened in surprise and panic. In front of him there was a corpse of one of the ants. His attention fixed on the corpse, and upon looking with a bit of attention, he saw that there was something small on top of the monster's head. It was the little spider. She opened her mouth and began to absorb the venom from the corpse. She was happy and her eyes were shining with excitement and joy. Our boy did not know what she was doing in the stadium. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,